He came through the church doors alone, carrying something no one at the funeral was ready to see. The rain had been falling since dawn over Beaufort, South Carolina, soft and steady, tapping against the stained glass windows of St. Matthew's like 1,000 quiet fingers asking to be let in. Outside, marine dress blues gathered beneath black umbrellas, their polished shoes darkened by puddles, their faces still and disciplined in the way grief teaches soldiers to stand upright when everything inside them is breaking. Inside the small coastal church, the air smelled of lilies, old wood, candle wax, and wet wool from the coats hung near the entrance. A folded American flag rested beside the casket at the front, its red and white stripes bright beneath the muted gold of the altar lights. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the organ seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. Staff Sergeant Marcus Taylor stood near the first pew, hands clasped in front of him, shoulders broad beneath his uniform, his dark skin catching the amber glow from the candles. He was 37, a United States Marine with a calm face and tired eyes, the kind of man who had learned to carry pain without making it someone else's burden. A thin scar crossed the edge of his left eyebrow, pale against his skin, but it was not the scar people noticed first. It was the silence around him. Marcus had not said more than 6 words since arriving. He had nodded to the chaplain. He had placed one gloved hand on the casket. Then he had stepped back, as if even standing too close might undo him. The man being honored that morning was Captain Elias Reed, Marcus's closest friend, his mentor, the one who had pulled him through more hard days than either of them ever admitted. Elias had been the kind of Marine who remembered birthdays, paid for coffee before anyone reached for a wallet, and knelt to greet every working dog by name before saluting any officer in the room. To the core, he had been steady. To his family, he had been gentle. To Marcus, he had been a brother chosen by fire, duty, and time. But there was one soul missing from the front pew. Ghost. Elias's white German Shepherd K9, 6 years old, trained for search and service, with a coat pale as winter grass and eyes the color of warm honey. Ghost had not appeared at the funeral home. He had not been seen at the kennel that morning. The handler assigned to bring him had arrived pale-faced and empty-handed, saying the dog had slipped through a gate before sunrise, not running wild, not panicked, just moving with purpose into the rain. Some thought the dog was confused. Some said animals grieved in strange ways. Marcus said nothing. He only looked toward the church doors once, then lowered his eyes. The chaplain began his final prayer, his voice low and even, rolling through the sanctuary like a hand over still water. Families bowed their heads. Marines tightened their jaws. Somewhere in the back, a woman quietly sobbed into a handkerchief. Then the old wooden doors opened with a slow, aching groan. Every head turned. For a breath, no one moved. A white German shepherd stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, rain dripping from his ears, his chest rising and falling with controlled exhaustion. Mud darkened his paws. His fur clung to his frame in silver-white ribbons. But his posture was not lost. It was not wild. It was ceremonial, almost sacred. Ghost stepped into the church with the solemn care of a soldier entering formation. His paws made soft, wet prints along the center aisle, one after another, each print fading into the red carpet like a memory trying not to disappear. In his mouth, he carried a small weathered pouch made of brown leather, tied shut with a strip of faded green cord. Marcus saw it and forgot how to breathe. The room seemed to tilt, not from fear, but from recognition approaching too fast. Ghost did not look left or right. He did not react to the murmurs, the shifting pews, the startled gasps. He walked straight toward the casket, toward the folded flag, toward the man who would never again call his name. When he reached the front, he stopped beside Marcus and lifted his eyes. There was no whine, no bark, only that look dogs have when they know more than anyone wants to believe. Marcus slowly bent one knee, the polished floor creaking beneath him. Ghost, he whispered, and the single word came out broken at the edges. The K9 lowered his head and placed the leather pouch gently at Marcus's feet. Then he sat, rainwater pooling beneath him, his gaze fixed on the casket as if reporting for one final duty. Marcus reached down with shaking hands, touched the cord, and felt the whole church holding its breath. Whatever was inside that pouch had crossed miles of rain, memory, and loyalty to arrive here. And somehow, before Marcus opened it, He already knew this was not just something Elias had left behind. It was something he had trusted Ghost to bring home. Marcus untied the faded green cord with the care of a man handling a prayer. The leather was stiff from rain, darker at the edges where Ghost's mouth had held it gently but firmly through the storm. No one in the church moved. The chaplain lowered his Bible by an inch. Captain Reed's mother, a small woman in a navy dress with silver hair pinned close to her head, lifted one hand to her lips. The only sound was the rain ticking against the stained glass and the soft breathing of the white K9 seated beside the casket. Marcus opened the pouch. Inside lay three things: a small brass key, a folded photograph sealed inside a plastic sleeve, and a pair of dog tags, worn smooth by years against a heartbeat. Marcus did not touch the tags first. He touched the photograph. His gloved thumb brushed rain from the sleeve as he lifted it into the candlelight. The picture was old, maybe 5 years old, taken on a bright day at Camp Lejeune. Elias stood in the center wearing a faded training shirt, smiling in that easy way that made younger Marines feel less afraid of the world. Beside him stood Marcus, younger, heavier in the shoulders, eyes still guarded but not yet tired. Between them sat Ghost, snow-white and proud, his ears high, his head tilted as if he had just heard a joke meant only for him. On the back of the photo, written in Elias's neat block letters, were 6 words. For Marcus, if I go first. Marcus closed his eyes. The church blurred around him. He remembered that day clearly. The heat had been close to 90 degrees. The gravel had shimmered under the Carolina sun. Ghost had been only a year old then, too alert for his age, too serious until Elias tossed him a rubber ball and laughed when the dog caught it midair like a piece of flying fate. Marcus had been new to that unit, transferred after a long stretch of hard assignments, carrying loneliness like extra weight in his pack. He did his job. He followed orders. He kept distance. Elias had noticed anyway. That was his gift. He saw the person behind the posture. He saw the wound behind the discipline. He saw when silence was not strength, but survival. You ever let anybody help you, Taylor? Elias had asked that afternoon, handing him a bottle of water. Marcus had shrugged. I am still standing. Elias had looked at Ghost, then back at him. So is a fence post. Does not mean it is alive. Marcus had almost smiled. Almost. From then on, Elias and Ghost became a strange kind of weather in his life, showing up quietly, persistently, always when he needed them most. There were evenings when Elias left coffee outside Marcus's door without a word. Mornings when Ghost sat beside Marcus during physical therapy, pressing one white paw against his boot, as if reminding him that movement could be small and still matter. Sundays when the three of them walked the marsh trails outside Beaufort, where the air smelled of salt grass and sun-warmed pine, and Ghost ran ahead like a piece of winter set loose in the green. Marcus opened his eyes again, and the present returned with the weight of candle smoke and lilies. He set the photograph on the edge of the flag stand and reached for the dog tags. They were not Elias's. That was what made his hand go still. The name stamped into the metal was not Captain Elias Reed. It was Private First Class Jonah Miller. Marcus felt the breath leave his chest in a quiet, stunned line. Jonah had been 19 when Marcus first met him, a shy kid from Kansas with red hair, freckles, and a habit of writing letters to his little sister every Thursday night. He had loved Ghost more than anyone except Elias did. He used to sneak the dog small pieces of plain turkey from the dining hall and whisper plans about opening a rescue kennel someday, a place for dogs nobody wanted, and veterans who needed a reason to come home. Jonah had not lived long enough to build it. His tags had been lost during a chaotic evacuation years earlier, or so everyone had believed. Elias had searched for them for weeks. Marcus had searched with him. When they finally stopped, Elias had said only one thing. Some promises take longer to come back. Now those lost tags lay in Marcus's palm, cold and real beneath the church lights. Ghost leaned forward and touched his nose to them once, gently, as if confirming what words could not. Marcus looked at the brass key still inside the pouch. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind used for a footlocker, with a red thread tied around its bow. Captain Reed's mother stood slowly, her face pale with recognition. Elias kept that in his study, she whispered. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. He said it was for the day Ghost came home with the truth. A murmur moved through the pews, soft as wind through dry leaves. Marcus looked down at Ghost. The dog's eyes did not move from him. There was rain on his muzzle, and something like exhaustion in his shoulders, but beneath it lived a command older than training. Follow. Remember. Finish what he started. Marcus rose slowly, the tags held against his chest, the key closed in his fist. For the first time that morning, he looked not at the casket but beyond it, toward whatever Elias had left waiting in silence. And beside him, Ghost stood too. Marcus slid the brass key from the pouch and held it up to the candlelight, noticing the way the flame flickered across the metal, casting moving shadows that danced on the polished wood of the pews. Ghost shifted beside him, one paw brushing against Marcus's boot, steadying him as if offering both comfort and guidance. The chapel smelled of rain-soaked pews and candle wax, a faint trace of wet earth creeping in from the open doors. Marcus took a slow breath, the kind that carries years of service, sacrifice, and long nights awake with nothing but quiet reflection, and he walked toward the side of the church where an old wooden chest sat beneath a tall window, the glass catching the last drops of the morning light. Every step he took, Ghost followed silently, ears alert, tail low but firm, the rhythm of their movement precise as if they had rehearsed it 1,000 times over the years. He knelt beside the chest and turned the key in the lock, hearing the soft click echo in the otherwise hushed space. Inside lay letters, folded neatly and bound with twine, each one in Elias's familiar, precise handwriting. Marcus picked up the first and unfolded it. The ink had faded to brown, but every word carried warmth, laughter, guidance, and unspoken wisdom. Ghost rested his chin on Marcus's knee, amber eyes tracking every movement, every pause as if sensing the weight of memory in Marcus's hands. As he read, Marcus felt the quiet echo of his friend's voice filling the chapel, a reminder of lessons learned on distant bases, in long marches across the Carolina marshes, and in moments when duty had seemed heavier than any man could carry alone. Outside, the rain slowed to a fine drizzle, softening the harsh edges of the morning, and the light shifted to a pale gold that filtered through the stained glass, illuminating the chest and the small pile of letters like a beacon. Marcus carefully removed a small leather-bound journal from the chest. He traced his fingers over the worn cover, feeling the impressions of Elias's handwriting pressed into the leather, a tangible connection to the man who had shaped so much of his life. Ghost moved closer, head tilting, ears flicking at the sound of the chapel doors creaking open slightly in the morning wind. Marcus opened the journal to the first page and found a note addressed to him. For Marcus, when the time comes. You have carried more than you know. Let Ghost guide you to what matters most. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard, unable to speak at first, and felt a warmth rise in his chest that had little to do with the physical chill of the room. Ghost shifted again, pawing gently at the edge of the journal, and Marcus understood. This was not just a letter. It was a map, a guide, a final act of care from a friend who had trusted both him and the dog to carry it forward. He traced the lines of the page with careful attention, noting plans, hopes, and small secrets Elias had kept for them both, each sentence a thread weaving Marcus and Ghost closer to the legacy that awaited outside the chapel. The rain now pattered lightly against the windows, soft as a lullaby, and Marcus leaned back slightly to take in the moment, Ghost resting fully against his side, breathing slow and even, a rhythm that grounded him. The other Marines in attendance had begun to move, stepping quietly toward the casket to pay their respects, but Marcus remained in place, feeling the gravity of the keys, the letters, and the dog that had never left his side through deployments, loss, and sorrow. For a long minute, time felt suspended, the world reduced to the warmth of memory and the soft presence of a companion who had carried loyalty further than any man could measure. Marcus closed the journal gently, placed it back in the chest, and reached down to ruffle Ghost's ears, feeling the wet fur under his hand, and the steady pulse of life that reminded him all things of value required patience, trust, and unwavering attention. The light shifted again, golden against the chest and the worn wood of the pews, as if the morning itself was blessing their careful movements. Marcus rose slowly, Ghost at his side, and they moved back toward the front of the church, toward the casket and the waiting family, carrying with them the weight of remembrance, love, and the quiet miracle of enduring bonds that spanned both years and miles. Marcus returned to the front of the church with the journal held against his chest, and Ghost walking close enough that his wet shoulder brushed the seam of Marcus's dress trousers. The funeral had changed shape around them. It was no longer only a goodbye. It had become a room full of people listening for something they could not name. Captain Reed's mother stood beside the casket, her hands folded around a white handkerchief, her eyes fixed on the leather-bound journal as if it carried the sound of her son's footsteps. Beside her was Elias's younger sister, Claire Reed, a schoolteacher from Savannah with kind brown eyes, rain-dark curls pinned beneath a black hat, and a face that looked brave because grief had not given it permission to collapse. Marcus approached them slowly, the brass key still warm in his palm from where he had held it too tightly. "Ma'am," he said softly to Mrs. Reed, his voice low enough that only the first rows could hear. "I think he meant for this to be opened today." Mrs. Reed looked down at Ghost. The white K9 sat at once, straight-backed and solemn, water still dripping from his fur onto the carpet. For a moment, the old woman did not look at the journal. She looked at the dog. Her lips trembled into something almost like a smile. "He always trusted you, Ghost," she whispered. Ghost blinked slowly, as if accepting both the praise and the burden. Marcus opened the journal again, this time to the page marked by a strip of blue ribbon. Elias's handwriting filled the paper in steady lines, firm but gentle, the way he had spoken when the world was loud and someone needed calm. Marcus began to read, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the careful respect of a man borrowing another man's voice. The words told of Jonah Miller's dream, the rescue kennel he had imagined on quiet nights, the place where working dogs could retire without being forgotten and wounded veterans could volunteer without having to explain the parts of themselves that still hurt. Elias had written that Jonah's family never knew how serious he had been, that the boy had drawn plans on the backs of envelopes and saved every spare dollar toward a future full of kennels, open fields, and second chances. Marcus paused. His eyes moved to the next line, and his throat tightened. Elias had spent the past 4 years building that dream in secret. Not with speeches, not with attention. Little by little, month by month, he had bought 5 acres outside Beaufort near the salt marsh, repaired an old farmhouse, and filed the papers for a non-profit under Jonah's name. He had kept it quiet because he wanted it to be ready before anyone saw it. A place for dogs like Ghost when their service years ended. A place for men and women like Marcus when silence became too heavy to carry alone. The room seemed to grow smaller, warmer, as the meaning settled over the pews. Claire covered her mouth with both hands. Mrs. Reed closed her eyes. Several Marines lowered their heads, not out of ceremony this time, but because something inside them had been touched too honestly to face. Marcus kept reading. Elias had written that if anything ever happened to him before the doors opened, Ghost would know where the final key was kept. Ghost would bring it to Marcus because Marcus understood both loyalty and loneliness. Marcus stopped there. He could not read the next sentence right away. The church waited with him. Rain softened against the windows. Somewhere outside, a gull cried over the gray harbor, thin and distant. Ghost leaned his body against Marcus's leg, not hard, just enough to remind him that he was not standing alone. Marcus looked at the page again. The final instruction was simple. Take him home. Open the gate. Let the first name on the sign be Jonah's, and let the second be ours. There was no dramatic sound when Marcus finished. No gasp large enough to fill the church. Only stillness. The kind that arrives when grief finds a door and sees light on the other side. Mrs. Reed reached for the dog tags in Marcus's hand. He placed them gently into her palm. She pressed them to her heart and bowed her head over them, her white hair trembling beneath the soft glow of the altar candles. "That boy had a mother," she said, barely above a whisper. "She should have these." Marcus nodded. "We will find her." Ghost suddenly rose. His ears turned toward the church doors. At first Marcus thought the dog had heard thunder, but the sky outside had quieted. Then Ghost took one slow step away from the casket, then another, looking back only once. It was not restlessness. It was direction. Marcus recognized it from years of working beside trained dogs. A signal, a request, maybe even an answer. The chaplain stepped aside without being asked. The Marines in the aisle parted. Mrs. Reed, Claire, Marcus, and Ghost moved together toward the open doors, leaving the candlelit hush behind them. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. The churchyard glistened silver. Parked near the curb, beneath a live oak dripping with water, sat an old green pickup truck Marcus recognized as Elias's. Its tailgate was down, and on the passenger seat, visible through the rain-streaked window, lay a folded canvas tarp, a stack of papers, and a wooden sign wrapped in cloth. Ghost walked straight to the truck, placed both front paws gently on the running board, and looked back at Marcus. Marcus felt the brass key in his hand once more. The funeral had not ended. It had become a beginning. Ghost did not climb into the truck at first. He only stood with his front paws on the running board, rainwater dripping from his white chest, his honey-colored eyes fixed on Marcus with a patience that felt almost human. The old green pickup smelled faintly of cedar, motor oil, and Elias Reed's peppermint gum, a scent so familiar it struck Marcus harder than he expected. For one brief second, he could almost see Elias leaning against the driver's door with one hand in his jacket pocket, telling him not to overthink what Grace had already placed in front of him. Marcus unlocked the passenger door with the brass key. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting all morning. Inside, the folded canvas tarp rested on the seat beside a manila envelope thick with papers and tied with the same faded green cord that had held the leather pouch shut. Under the tarp was a wooden sign, carefully wrapped in brown cloth, its edges sanded smooth by hand. Mrs. Reed stood beneath the live oak, one hand tucked around Jonah Miller's dog tags, the other holding Claire's arm. The Marines from the funeral gathered quietly along the church steps, their dress blues dark under the mist, their faces caught between mourning and wonder. Marcus lifted the envelope first. His name was written across the front in Elias's handwriting. Staff Sergeant Marcus Taylor. Open only when Ghost asks you to move. Marcus looked down. Ghost had lowered all four paws to the ground and now stood facing the road, ears forward, body still. Not anxious. Not lost. Waiting. Marcus opened the envelope and found property papers, nonprofit documents, a set of veterinary partnership agreements, and a map marked in blue ink. 5 acres off Sea Island Parkway, 6 miles from the church, just beyond the marsh line where the land opened into. Fields of tall grass and quiet oaks. At the top of the first page was the name of the place Elias had built in secret. Jonah's Gate, K9 Sanctuary. Marcus read the words once. Then again. Something inside his chest shifted, not breaking, but making room. Claire stepped closer, her voice soft. He was going there every Saturday. Marcus looked up. You knew? She shook her head slowly. Not all of it. I thought he was repairing an old house for a veteran family. He said the place needed a lot of work and even more prayer. She smiled through tears. That sounded like Elias, so I did not ask too many questions. Marcus folded the papers carefully and pulled back the cloth from the wooden sign. The mist seemed to hush around them. The sign was simple, hand-carved, with dark letters burned into pale cedar. Jonah's Gate, K9 Sanctuary. Beneath it, in smaller words, for every loyal soul still finding the way home. No one spoke. Ghost stepped forward and touched his nose to the edge of the sign. Not once, but twice. A small gesture. A blessing. Mrs. Reed began to cry then, not loudly, not helplessly, but with the deep, trembling release of a mother who had just discovered her son had left love planted somewhere beyond the grave. Marcus carried the sign to the truck bed and placed it gently inside. I am taking him there, he said. He did not ask permission because it did not feel like a choice. It felt like obedience. Mrs. Reed nodded. Then we are coming too. 10 minutes later, the funeral procession had changed direction. Instead of driving straight to the cemetery reception hall, the line of cars followed Elias's green pickup through the wet streets of Beaufort, past white porches, moss-draped oaks, and puddles reflecting a sky beginning to lighten. Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel. Ghost sat in the passenger seat, tall and silent, the leather pouch resting between his front paws. Every few moments, the dog lifted his nose toward the cracked window, catching the damp salt air as if reading a message written in scent. The road curved away from town and opened toward the marsh. Spanish moss hung from the trees in silver-green curtains. Egrets stood in the shallows like folded prayers. The tide was low, revealing dark ribbons of mud and the patient tracks of small creatures crossing the flats. Marcus glanced at Ghost. You have been here before, have you not? Ghost gave no sound. But his ears flicked once, and Marcus understood. After 6 miles, the map led them to a narrow gravel road half hidden between 2 live oaks. A wooden post stood beside it, bare except for 2 old screw marks where a sign had clearly been meant to hang. Marcus slowed the truck. The tires crunched softly over wet stone. Ahead, beyond a curtain of pines, the farmhouse appeared. It was modest, painted white, with a blue porch swing, a new roof, and a ramp built neatly along the front steps. Behind it stretched fenced fields, a small training yard, a row of clean kennels, and a barn with fresh red trim. Wind bells hung from the porch, ringing softly in the mist. Not rich, not grand, but ready. Ghost pressed one paw against the passenger door before Marcus had even parked. The moment Marcus opened it, the white K9 jumped down and trotted straight toward the front gate. There he stopped. He did not enter. He waited beside the empty wooden post. Marcus climbed out with the sign in both hands. The others arrived behind him, doors opening quietly, shoes stepping into damp gravel. Together, they watched as Marcus fitted the cedar sign onto the post where Elias had intended it to go. The screws were already there in a small tin nailed to the fence. Of course they were. Elias had thought of everything. Marcus fastened the sign into place, each turn of the screwdriver sounding small but permanent. When he finished, Ghost stepped through the gate first, paused in the open yard, and lifted his head toward the pale morning sky. He did not bark. He simply stood there, white against the green field, as if reporting that the promise had been delivered. And for the first time since dawn, Marcus felt that the day was no longer only about what had been lost. It was about what love had refused to leave unfinished. The field beyond the gate smelled of wet grass, pine boards, and fresh paint. But beneath those clean new scents lived something older, something. Marcus could not name it first. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of someone good working quietly when no one was watching. Ghost walked across the yard with slow purpose, leaving pale tracks through the damp grass, his white coat bright against the gray morning. The others followed at a respectful distance. Mrs. Reed held Jonah Miller's dog tags in both hands. Claire carried the journal. 3 Marines from Elias's unit walked behind them without speaking, their shoes dark with mud now, their dress uniforms no longer perfect, but somehow more honest for it. The sanctuary was simple, but every part of it carried Elias's careful fingerprints. The kennels had thick bedding, clean water bowls, and wide windows facing the marsh instead of bare walls. The training yard had low ramps and shaded benches. The farmhouse porch had a ramp strong enough for wheelchairs, and the front door had been painted a calm blue, the kind of blue people choose when they want a place to feel safe before anyone steps inside. Marcus paused there, hand resting on the rail. He thought of the final instruction Elias had written. Take him home. Open the gate. Let the first name on the sign be Jonah's, and let the second be ours. Ours. That word stayed with him. It did not sound like ownership. It sounded like belonging. Ghost stopped near the barn and looked back. His ears lifted. Marcus followed him through a side door that creaked softly on new hinges. Inside, the barn smelled of cedar shavings and clean canvas. Sunlight pushed through high windows in pale beams, catching dust in the air like tiny gold prayers. Along one wall stood shelves of supplies: leashes, blankets, brushes, first aid kits, bags of dog food, and folded volunteer shirts. On the opposite wall hung framed photographs Marcus had never seen before. Jonah Miller smiling with a tennis ball in one hand. Elias kneeling beside Ghost in a training field. A younger Marcus standing off to the side, unaware he had been captured in the edge of someone else's memory. Beneath the photographs was another small plaque. Not for the fallen only, for the ones still learning how to live. Marcus read it twice, and the second time his eyes burned. Ghost moved to a wooden door at the back of the barn and pawed it gently. Once, then again. Marcus reached for the latch. All right, he whispered. Show me. The door opened into a smaller room, warmer than the barn, lit by a lamp that had been left off but plugged in, ready. There was a desk, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs, and a cot with a folded quilt at the foot. On the desk sat a second envelope. This one was not addressed to Marcus. It was addressed to Mrs. Angela Miller, Wichita, Kansas, Jonah's mother. Mrs. Reed drew in a quiet breath when Marcus read the name aloud. She stepped into the room slowly, as if entering a chapel. Elias found her, Claire said, her voice trembling with realization. Marcus opened the envelope only enough to see what was inside, careful not to disturb the letter. There were documents, photographs, and a travel voucher already paid for. Elias had planned to bring Jonah's mother here for the sanctuary opening. He had planned for her to receive her son's dog tags not as an ending, but beside the living promise his dream had become. Mrs. Reed pressed one hand against the desk. "He never told me," she said. Claire wiped her eyes. "He probably did not want you carrying it before it was ready." Marcus looked down at Ghost. The dog sat beside the cot, his body finally showing the long miles of the morning. His shoulders lowered. His eyes softened. He had delivered the pouch, led them to the truck, guided them to the sanctuary, and brought them to the room where the last unfinished mercy waited. But now he looked tired in a way Marcus had not noticed before. Not injured, not broken, just emptied by purpose. Marcus knelt beside him and placed a hand against the dog's wet neck. "You did good, boy," he said. The words came out rough and quiet. "You brought him home." Ghost leaned into him, and for the first time that day, a faint whine slipped from his throat. It was small, almost hidden, but it crossed the room like a thread pulled tight through every heart there. Mrs. Reed came forward and lowered herself carefully into the chair beside them. She touched Ghost's head with trembling fingers. "You miss him too," she said. Ghost closed his eyes. That was when Marcus understood the part no paper had explained. Everyone had been looking at Ghost as the messenger, the miracle carrier, the brave white K9 who knew where to go. But Ghost had also lost his person. He had walked through rain into a funeral not only to give them answers, but because he had nowhere else to put his grief. Marcus bowed his head until his forehead nearly touched Ghost's. The scent of rain and clean fur filled his lungs. Around him, the barn stood quiet, waiting for life. Outside, wind bells rang on the farmhouse porch, light and uncertain. Marcus reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out the worn photograph from the pouch, the one of Elias, Ghost, and himself at Camp Lejeune. He placed it on the desk beside the envelope for Jonah's mother. "We will call her today," he said. His voice steadied as he spoke. "We will bring her here. We will open this place. And Ghost stays with me until he decides otherwise." Mrs. Reed nodded through tears. Claire smiled, small but real. Ghost opened his eyes and looked at Marcus, and there it was again, that quiet knowing that seemed to come from somewhere beyond training. The morning had given them grief, keys, letters, and a gate. Now it gave them a duty. Not the loud kind. Not the kind with orders shouted across a field. A gentler duty. To keep a promise alive long enough for wounded souls to find it. By late afternoon, the rain had fully passed, leaving the sanctuary washed clean beneath a sky the color of pearl. The funeral clothes no longer felt like funeral clothes by then. Mud clung to polished shoes. Sleeves were damp. Collars had loosened. Grief had not disappeared, but it had changed its posture. It no longer stood over them like a locked door. It moved beside them now, quieter, almost willing to be carried. Marcus sat at the desk in the small room behind the barn, the phone resting in front of him, Jonah Miller's dog tags wrapped in Mrs. Reed's handkerchief beside the envelope Elias had prepared. Ghost lay on the floor near his boots, his white body curled into a tired crescent, one ear still lifted as if duty refused to let him fully sleep. Claire stood by the window, looking out toward the marsh where the tide had begun creeping back in silver lines. Mrs. Reed sat in the chair opposite Marcus, her hands folded, her face pale but peaceful in a way it had not been inside the church. Marcus had made difficult calls before. Calls to families. Calls to commanders. Calls that required steady language because shaking words could hurt someone already wounded. But this one felt different. This was not only news. This was a door opening into a room that had been dark for years. He dialed the number Elias had written in the margin of the file. The ring sounded small in the quiet office. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a woman answered, her voice careful, older, and tired in the way people become when hope has disappointed them too often. "This is Angela Miller." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "Mrs. Miller, my name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Taylor, United States Marine Corps. I served with your son, Jonah." Silence came through the line, so complete that Marcus could hear the wind bells outside the farmhouse porch. When Angela spoke again, her voice had lost its steadiness. "Is this about Jonah?" Marcus looked at the dog tags. "Yes, ma'am, but it is not bad news." He paused. because he knew how impossible those words must sound. It is something your son left behind. Something good. Ghost lifted his head at the sound of Marcus's voice, then slowly rose and came to sit beside the chair. Marcus continued, telling Angela about Elias, about the sanctuary, about Jonah's drawings and his dream of a place for service dogs and veterans, about the dog tags Ghost had carried through the rain. He did not rush. He let each truth arrive gently. On the other end of the line, Angela cried without trying to hide it. Not loud, not broken, just the sound of a mother receiving a piece of her child she had believed the world had misplaced forever. He wrote about that dog, she whispered. Ghost. Jonah said that dog looked like snow with a heartbeat. Marcus lowered his hand to Ghost's head. The K9 leaned into his palm. He remembered him too, ma'am. Angela gave a small, trembling laugh through tears. Jonah always wanted to save everyone. Stray dogs. Lonely. Neighbors. Even his father's old pickup after the engine gave out. He would say, Mama, something broken is not the same as something finished. The words settled into the room. Claire turned from the window, eyes shining. Mrs. Reed pressed the handkerchief against her mouth. Marcus felt that sentence reach somewhere deep in him, somewhere he had kept closed because unfinished pain was easier to ignore than to heal. Captain Reed arranged travel for you, Marcus said softly. He wanted you here when the sanctuary opened. We still do. Angela did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was barely above a breath. I have not been near Marines since the day they brought me the flag. Marcus understood. The room understood. Even Ghost seemed to grow still, as if honoring the weight of that memory without needing it explained. You will not have to come alone, Marcus said. We will meet you at the airport. Mrs. Reed will be here. Ghost will be here. Angela cried again then. But this time there was something inside it that sounded almost like surrender. Then I will come, she said. For Jonah. And for the dog with snow in his fur. After the call ended, Marcus remained seated, the receiver resting in his hand. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds at last, striking the wet field so the grass flashed green and gold. Ghost turned toward the window, his ears rising. From the front gate came the low sound of tires on gravel. A white County Animal Services van had pulled into the drive. Marcus stood slowly. A woman in a navy rain jacket stepped out, followed by a younger man carrying a clipboard. In the back of the van, behind clean metal grates, 3 dogs watched the field with cautious eyes. Not broken, not finished, just waiting. The woman looked at the new sign, then at Marcus in his dress blues, then at Ghost standing tall beside him. We were told Captain Reed's intake paperwork was already approved, she said gently. He scheduled the first arrivals for today. Marcus looked down at Ghost. The white K9 took one step forward, then another, his tiredness forgotten. The sanctuary had not even opened, yet its first souls had found the gate. Marcus felt the day bend again toward grace. Yes, ma'am, he said, voice quiet but certain. He was expecting them. The morning sun climbed higher over the marsh, casting long pale rays across the sanctuary grounds, making the wet grass shimmer like liquid silver. Ghost walked beside Marcus, each step deliberate, paws pressing into the soft earth, leaving trails that caught the light and held it for a moment before the wind swept it away. The 3 incoming dogs from the van hesitated at the gate, ears perked, bodies tense but curious, and Ghost turned his head just slightly, acknowledging them without a sound. Marcus opened the gate fully, stepping aside, and Ghost led them into the yard, moving at a slow, ceremonial pace, nose lifting to catch the sense of the new arrivals, tail low but steady, signaling calm and order. Mrs. Reed followed, carrying Jonah's dog tags gently in her hand, Claire beside her holding the journal open to the first page, the ink faded but still legible, the words alive with a voice that had been absent too long. Marcus walked to the side of the yard where the first of the kennels waited, carefully lifted the latch, and allowed the dog with soft brown eyes and a wiry frame to step inside, Ghost at his side, ensuring that each new guest felt the measure of safety and welcome Elias and Jonah had imagined. A soft breeze moved through the trees lining the property, carrying the smell of pine, wet earth, and salt from the nearby river. Marcus watched the dogs explore the yard, sniffing the grass, the kennels, the porch, learning the boundaries and the promise that waited in each corner. He knelt beside Ghost, fingers running through the damp fur on his neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath his hand and the quiet pulse of loyalty that had guided them through the rain, the funeral, and now to this place. Marcus glanced at Mrs. Reed, whose eyes lingered on the new arrivals, seeing not only the dogs but the legacy and love that had been left to them, something tangible and permanent where sorrow had once only lingered. The 3 Marines from Elias's unit spread out, helping with simple tasks, setting water bowls, straightening blankets, and walking the perimeter, their presence quiet, respectful, and steady, echoing the same discipline that had once carried Marcus and Elias through countless missions. Claire opened the journal, reading aloud the letter Jonah had written to his mother about the sanctuary, the voice soft, carrying the reverence of someone reading a prayer aloud. Outside, Ghost stood at the edge of the yard, watching the van depart with the last of the supplies, his ears lifting at each sound, head turning as if to confirm that all was as it should be. Marcus rose and moved beside him, reaching for the leash that had hung and used in the barn, clipping it to Ghost's collar with a soft click. He stepped forward and let the dog guide him to the first kennel, gently placing Jonah's dog tags in a small bowl inside. Ghost sat, eyes bright and steady, watching as the other dogs began to settle, their anxiety easing under his calm influence. Mrs. Reed and Claire walked along the path, placing the journal and letters in the office beside the main barn, each step deliberate, each movement a quiet act of care. Marcus turned toward the house, noticing the sun glinting off the roof, reflecting in the windows, and for the first time that day, he let himself feel the small relief of beginnings. Ghost followed, shoulders low now, tail relaxed, body no longer weighted with anticipation, but holding the quiet dignity of a job completed and trust upheld. Marcus paused on the porch steps, hand resting lightly on the railing, taking in the sweep of fields, the wooden sign firmly in place, the freshly painted kennels, and the small line of dogs who had already begun to call this place home. He whispered to Ghost, "We are here. You brought us here." The white K9 leaned against him once, a single breath shared between them, carrying the calm of understanding, the steady certainty of faith, and the quiet miracle of a promise fulfilled. The wind moved through the trees again, scattering droplets across the grass, and somewhere deep in the marsh, a heron took flight, lifting with grace into the clear morning light, a witness to loyalty, love, and the start of something that would carry forward long after the day ended. The sun lowered itself toward the horizon, painting the sky over the sanctuary in streaks of orange and soft violet that reflected on the still puddles left from the morning rain. Ghost moved along the fence line, ears twitching at every distant bird call, tail sweeping low but steady, keeping pace with Marcus as he walked beside him. Marcus carried the last envelope from the pouch, the papers inside detailing volunteer schedules, veterinary checkups, and the list of the first animals ready to arrive for care. The wind whispered through the tall marsh grass beyond the property, carrying with it the faint scent of salt water and pine. Mrs. Reed and Claire followed behind, carrying small cloth bundles of blankets and toys for the incoming dogs, each step measured, each movement reverent, as if even the air of the sanctuary demanded patience and respect. Marcus stopped near the first kennel, crouched, and gestured for Ghost to lead the way. The white K9 entered first, pausing only to glance back at Marcus, acknowledging that the responsibility of guiding the new arrivals rested on him as much as it rested on the Marine beside him. The first dog hesitated at the threshold, a soft brown-coated retriever with amber eyes that mirrored Ghost's own. Ghost sniffed the air, lowered his head, and nudged gently with his muzzle. The dog stepped forward, paw by paw, into the shelter, the tension of unfamiliarity melting away with each careful movement. Marcus straightened, scanning the fields, the kennels, and the small group that had arrived with the van. He could feel the pulse of life shifting in the space, as if the morning had been waiting for this precise moment to unfold. Sunlight fell in narrow beams between the clouds, catching dust motes in the air like floating lanterns. Ghost led the second dog, a medium-sized shepherd mix, through the yard, the motion fluid and deliberate, and the dog followed without hesitation, sensing the calm authority that radiated from the white K9. Mrs. Reed reached the porch of the farmhouse and looked at the small garden Elias had planted years ago, now thriving in the wet soil. She smiled faintly, seeing the continuity of life that had carried them here, the meticulous care in every detail, from the benches along the yard to the clean kennels and the ramp leading into the house. Marcus moved to the barn, checking that the paperwork had been placed in the filing cabinet and that the first aid supplies were within reach. Ghost sat near the center of the yard, turning his head occasionally to watch each new arrival, ears forward, tail relaxed, a sentinel of loyalty and grace. The van returned with more dogs, each one looking curious, uncertain, yet carrying within them a trust that had already been shaped by miles, time, and patience. Marcus greeted each animal, speaking softly, using the same cadence he had once used in training fields and on quiet bases, letting words be gentle nudges rather than commands, allowing the dogs to settle and understand that this was a place of safety and patience. Claire carried the journal into the office, placing it open on the desk, and Mrs. Reed sat beside it, tracing the words with her fingers, tears slipping freely now, a soft, continuous stream that spoke more of peace than sorrow. Marcus returned to the yard, placing his hand briefly on Ghost's wet neck. "You did well," he murmured. Ghost leaned into the hand, eyes softening, as if understanding both the words and the weight of what they had accomplished together. The sky turned a deeper hue, the last light glinting off the puddles and making the freshly painted signs and kennels glow. Birds settled in the trees, their calls soft and tentative, mingling with the distant sound of water lapping against the marsh's edge. Marcus surveyed the sanctuary, the dogs moving into their new spaces, some exploring, some curling into bedding for the first time, others pausing to sniff and adjust. He breathed deeply, the scent of pine, wet earth, and fresh canvas filling his lungs, letting the day's weight settle in a way that was neither heavy nor light, just real. Ghost walked slowly to Marcus's side, nudged his hand, and then moved toward the gate again, ears high, alert, tail relaxed, signaling that all was in order, that each arrival was met, and that the promise they had been carrying together since the morning had found its place. Marcus followed, looking out over the fields and fences, the sun dipping below the horizon, bathing the sanctuary in gold and violet light. And for the first time that day, the grief, the rain, and the loss seemed not absent but transformed into a quiet, enduring hope that would hold here for all who entered,